My friend Bart Ehrman recently posted the following entry. When Christian apologists say things that don't seem to make sense, are they being honest or do they genuinely believe what they're saying? Bart says that he's been asked this question from a number of people who follow him. And he mentions a Christian apologetics conference that took place in Chicago. It was put on by Veracity Hill and Kurt Jarris in October 2019. A number of us were some of the speakers there, Craig Keener, Rob Bowman, Bart Ehrman, and myself. And we would talk on issues such as how we would explain the differences, the discrepancies in the Gospels, and what about are the Gospels historically reliable? There were other speakers there too. I met Elizabeth Urbanovitz at this conference and got to know her a little bit. And there were some other speakers there. It was a good conference. It culminated with a panel discussion moderated by Kurt Jarris, and there were a number of really thoughtful questions that were asked. In fact, I'll put a link up where you can go to that panel discussion. Now, one of the questions was asked about when Jesus commissioned his disciples and sent them out on a mission, what they were to take with them or not take with them. And again, this is one of the questions, and this is the one gospel difference discrepancy to which Bart refers in his post. He says there are many others, and of course there are. There are many others that could be discussed. But this one in particular is kind of interesting. Let's take a look at what's said. In Mark chapter 6, verses 8 and 9, it reads, "And Jesus instructed them, the disciples, that they may take nothing on the way except a staff, not bread, not a bag, not money in the belt, but although wearing sandals, you may not wear 2 tunics." Now that differs a little bit from what Matthew writes in chapter 10, verses 9 and 10. He says, "Do not obtain gold or silver or bronze for your belts, not a bag for the way, not 2 tunics, not sandals, not a staff, for the worker is worthy of his food." And although Bart doesn't mention it, we also have a parallel account in Luke's Gospel, chapter 9, verse 3. "And he said to them, Take nothing for the way, not a staff, not a bag, not bread, not silver, not to have 2 tunics." Now what's going on here? There's a difference between the way these 3 accounts are. Certainly the wording is not the same. The gist, of course, is the same. But there's one major difference, and that has to do with the staff. So you have Mark Jesus saying that they can take a staff, whereas Matthew and Luke, Jesus says, do not take a staff. So we were all asked, what do you think about this? And both Rob and Craig said they thought this could be harmonized. I forgot how they tried to harmonize it. In fact, I think Craig even said he agreed with the way I tried to resolve it. Bart said he thought Mark presented it in the right way and that Matthew, I think he said Matthew changed it. I don't remember. And when it came to me, I said, I think that Mark preserves, if we had been there, this is the way Jesus said it. But that Matthew and Luke either used Matthew or Matthew and Luke are drawing on a common source, that either Matthew or that common source merely simplified. And what I mean by that is this. The overall message that Jesus is sending here when he tells them not to take food and extra clothing with them and things like that is, look, God's going to take care of you. Just trust God. This is going to be a lesson for you when you go out, and you're going to see God provide for you. You just don't need to take these things. That's why I'm telling you don't take them so you can learn to trust God. Well, Matthew or his source is just doing the same thing here. Jesus is doing the same thing, but Matthew or his source is adjusting it, eliminating the qualification of the staff because it just seems at that point to be irrelevant. And they do it just to simplify the account and to make the point all the more clear. Trust God for everything He's going to provide for you. Now, that's the answer that I gave in a nutshell. Here's how Bart responded to that. He writes in his blog, "So in this view, Matthew reports the opposite, both of what Jesus actually said and reverses what Mark, correctly in Mike's view, reports he said. But that is not an error. I was a bit incredulous. If you want to know what Jesus said and you read Matthew, you would think he said the opposite of what he really did say. How could that not be a contradiction of Mark? And if Mark is right in what Jesus said, Matthew is wrong. How could that not be an error? Mike had an explanation. In his view, Matthew was fully cognizant of what he was doing when he changed Mark's account. This was standard practice among ancient biographers to alter accounts that they had inherited when they wanted to emphasize one point or another. Since Matthew was doing it on purpose, it was not an error. I suppose on one level, that might sort of make sense. In this view, Matthew didn't make an unconscious mistake. He made a deliberate alteration. But, well, really? It's not an error? It gives a false report of what Jesus said. Sure seems like an error to me, whether Matthew meant to contradict Mark or just did it by accident. In my view, it's like this. If I give you a piece of false information, for example, if I say that after he lost the election in 1980, Jimmy Carter divorced his wife Rosalind, which he did not, then, well, it's not true. It's an error. Maybe I simply made a mistake. I thought they had gotten a divorce, but I was wrong. Or maybe I intentionally said that they did because I had some agenda or wanted to make a point. But in either case, whether I say it on purpose or by accident, my report is wrong. You would not say that my statement was inerrant. Or, more simply, if you ask someone for directions and they intentionally give you the wrong ones, would you say that the directions are completely accurate without error, since the person had reasons for what she said? For Bart, this is a real head-scratcher. Well, I think he overdoes this in a big way. There is a big difference between maintaining an accurate gist by some slight simplifications and paraphrasing. There's a big difference between that and what's going on with the staff here than saying the falsity that Jimmy Carter divorced his wife Rosalind immediately after the election when it didn't happen. That would be to tell a total untruth. But to paraphrase and to simplify, you could say that it's a contradiction, at least on the surface, but it's not too much of a meaningful one because an accurate gist is still preserved in all the accounts. Perhaps I can give an illustration that I learned about 2 decades ago. When my family lived in Virginia Beach, my wife and I were friends with 4 other couples, really close friends with them. We were all involved in Christian ministry to some extent, and we met at one of our homes. We swapped homes and things like that, meeting at different homes, and we'd meet every couple of weeks. We'd have dinner together, and then we'd just talk about what we did since the last time we met, and we'd pray and maybe do some Bible study. But we just hung out and had some fun and had our batteries recharged. It was a great time. Well, it didn't take long for us to observe a pattern in the way stories were told. So it'd be like this. When one of the girls would tell a story, some of us guys might at some point roll our eyes and say, "Oh, it's too many details. We don't need this. Come on, the game's coming on in 10 minutes. Whereas if a guy told the story, one of the ladies would speak up and say, "Well, now wait a minute, you left out this part." And the guy would say, "Well, yeah, I did that on purpose because it's not really relevant." And the girl would say, "But it is relevant." And then after a while, things like this happening, one of the other women would say, "Yeah, let's hear it. Give me the girl version." And it's like, yeah, there is definitely a difference, generally speaking, in the way girls tell stories and the way guys tell stories. Girls like a lot of details. Guys like bullet points. Just give me the bottom line. Especially, I'm talking about when it's small talk kind of things. And of course, there are many, many exceptions to the rule here. But generally speaking, I think it's an accurate stereotype to say that girls like a lot of more details than guys when they're just relaying a story. There's the girl version of the story and there's the guy version of the story. I generally like the guy version of a story. Sure, I would, if I were back in Jesus' day, and I would want to know precisely what was said. In other words, me in the 21st century, I would like to know precisely what was said and what was done. I wish that all the historians in antiquity, the gospel authors, and all of the historians and biographers reported with the accuracy of watching it on a video. But they didn't do that. It wasn't within even their literary conventions to do so. And so I'm not going to expect them to do that. I am looking for an accurate gist of what happened. I'm looking for the guy version of the story. Now, fortunately, when we come to Mark, he generally gives us the girl version. He gives us a lot more detailed details of a story than usually Matthew and Luke do. Luke has a tendency to abbreviate. Matthew has a tendency to simplify. We see this on several occasions throughout his gospel. And so, honestly, I don't really refer to these as contradictions. They would be, you could say, on a technical basis on the surface, but not really in much of the meaning that is going on. So my view is that the differences very often, though not always, result from the author paraphrasing, using the things that they had been taught when they were taught to read, taught to write, using the compositional textbooks that were commonplace back then. This is the kind of stuff that ancient biographers were taught to do, and we should expect the gospel authors no less than any of the other ancient biographers and historians to do it. The funny thing, though, is when you compare how the gospel authors use their sources, like, for example, when Matthew and Luke use Mark, and you compare that with how other authors like Plutarch and Suetonius and Josephus and Philo, the two Jewish authors of that time, historians, how they use their sources, we find that the gospel authors actually stick closer to their source, Mark, than other historians and biographers do to their sources, even closer to Mark than how Josephus and Philo stay to Scripture. So I think that's kind of interesting. So should the matter of whether Jesus told them to take a staff or not take a staff, is that really a head scratcher? Well, I at least don't see why it should be. Now, let me turn things around here for a moment. Bart says that there are people who come to him and says, do these Christian apologists, do they really believe some of the things they say? Well, I can't answer for other Christian apologists any more than Bart can answer for any of his fellow atheist friends. But I will say there are, the people, when they ask me, does Bart really believe these things that he says, many of the things he says? And they ask this because they suspect that on many occasions he's just being pedantic and trying to proliferate his skeptical views. So when they ask me if they think this is the case with Bart, I just say, look, I can't know the heart of another. But I do think that Bart actually believes these things that he says, that these are contradictions. And as a result of them being there, they undermine the confidence that we can put in the reliability of these accounts. Honestly, I think that such an approach to reliability and contradictions is just stale, wooden, and lacks literary sensitivities. I think Bart is a great guy, but I think this is just a weakness in his approach to looking at ancient literature, whether it's the Gospels or other ancient literature. Anyway, that's my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments.